Alright, I finally finished that giant builder roster video, so I can take a little break before I start my next project. I'm just gonna take a little bit of time to relax, sit back, turn on the Nintendo Direct, and okay, looks like I need to get back to work. Hey everyone, it's me, Thorgi, and you know, I normally don't do videos about news stories, typically because I can never get them out quick enough for them to still be relevant, but darn it, this is something we need to talk about. Last week, at a Nintendo Direct of all places, it was announced that Marvel vs. Capcom was finally going to get a re-release. One of, if not the most requested video game re-release in history is finally happening. I'm sure if you're watching this channel, you already know all about this, but in case you don't, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is considered by many people to be one of the greatest fighting games of all time, but it's been locked in the Capcom vault for over a decade now, and Disney has had the keys. This game getting a re-release was thought to be impossible, but it's finally happening. And it's not just Marvel 2 that's getting a re-release, it's a whole collection with all the Marvel and Capcom classic fighters. I'm sure all week you've been seeing reaction videos from people at this announcement. Sadly, I wasn't streaming my reaction because I didn't expect there to be anything that crazy at this Direct, but I'll just let you know right now, when this got revealed, I didn't scream, I didn't start jumping around. No, I went the opposite direction. My jaw dropped and I just froze. Couldn't say a word until about halfway through the reveal, and I finally just said, "What?" At which point my wife, who was watching the Direct in the other room, just burst out laughing. Yeah, I couldn't even process this was real. It wasn't until like 5 minutes after the trailer was over that I finally was able to talk again, and I'm pretty sure I didn't register a single other announcement made during that Direct. I keep seeing fan art all over the place of Zelda holding a table. I have zero idea what that's in reference to because it was revealed like 2 minutes after the Marvel trailer, and everything during that time span is just lost in the fog. But I had to come in here and talk about this today because this is a monumental announcement and there's a lot that I want to dissect about. But before we go any further, we all owe a huge thank you to everyone behind the free Marvel vs. Capcom 2 movement. For anyone who doesn't know, Maximilian Dude started this hashtag about 3 years ago, and the entire FGC showed up. There were so many artists and content creators and streamers and just flat out fans coming together to make videos and drawings and post about this, spreading the hashtag around until it was trending worldwide. Everyone was talking about this. And yeah, I can't guarantee that this movement led to this collection getting made, but there's a damn good chance it did. The odds are at least around 80%. So yeah, huge thanks to Maximilian Dude and all the other artists and creators who joined in to draw attention to this. And you know what? Big thanks also to the modders behind Marvel 3. Yeah, that's another big movement in the Marvel sphere over the past couple of years. There have been so many modders making new characters for Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 to the point where we're actually getting modded tournaments and mod packages with their own trailers, acting like this is a brand new release of the game. And it's become so big over the past few years that there is no way nobody at Capcom has noticed it. Heck, probably at Disney too, considering how protective of their IPs they are. I'd totally be willing to say someone at Capcom saw how many people were specifically playing the modded versions of Marvel 3 and said, you know, I think people might really want some more Marvel. And I haven't even mentioned the tournament organizers who got Marvel 3 to return to EVO last year. My point is, there have been so many voices calling for more Marvel, and those voices definitely reached someone at Capcom. And let me just say, from what we've seen so far this collection, it looks like it is loaded with care and attention. I mean, just look at this artwork and you can feel the love just oozing off this cover. All the mashups between both sides, like Captain America and Captain Commando, Dr. Doom and Bison, the two dictators facing off with each other. Then you got Morgan and Spider-Man, which means not only did the person who drew this know about this game, they knew about the running gag between these two. which, before anyone points out in the comments, yes, that running gag is actually based on a misconception, because a lot of people think that Spider-Man has a unique win quote with just Morgan, but no, he actually has that win quote with everyone. It's just that when it's paired up with Morgan, it becomes kind of funny, but you know what, we're not getting into all that. The point is, this is a running gag, and whoever put this artwork together knew it, so that means that they are a fan of this series. And of course, the freaking handshake. The most legendary handshake in fighting game history, right there at the center. And it's not just Cyclops and Ryu reenacting that handshake. The sheer joy on both of their faces, it just screams it's good to be back. Like, this is the way two guys shake hands when they thought they would never see each other again. That's not even a handshake anymore. They're beyond handshaking. They're dapping up at this point. And I have to throw this out there. This is such a small thing, but puts such a big smile on my face. This isn't called the Marvel vs. Capcom Collection. It's called the Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection. Why is that important? Because it doesn't just have the same name, but even the exact same logo as the previous fighting game collection that they put out. That tells me that the last fighting game collection was a success. Because Capcom never shared the sales numbers for that game, so a lot of people were worried, oh, I guess that means it bombed, nobody bought it. But if it had been a bomb, they would not have reused that logo for this collection. They would have just called this the Marvel vs. Capcom Collection. In fact, if you go on Capcom's website, they now list the fighting game collection as its own series. That means y'all did it. You actually showed up enough to make Capcom go, okay, I guess people want our old fighting games. And the fact that this is now listed as a series, that means we could get more of them. We could get the 3D collection that we want. Or, more than likely, considering what massive fans of SNK the two guys heading up Capcom's fighting game division are, and considering the recent crossover that's happening in Street Fighter 6, we're probably going to get the Capcom vs. SNK collection. Now, I said that last collection must have been a success, but I know someone is going to look at the Steam numbers. They're going to look on Steam charts and say, oh, those numbers are low. That's not a success. That's not impressive. I'm going to address this later, but let's just say those Steam numbers aren't as important to this collection as you might think. But what does this mean for Marvel? Could this franchise actually come back? What does this mean for Capcom's fighting games in general? There's a whole lot that I want to pick apart here. In fact, maybe a bit too much. I sat down to write this script thinking it would be like 15 minutes long, and yeah, recording it now, I realize I once again underestimated how long-winded I can be. So my apologies for this accidental podcast you're all about to listen to. But let's go ahead and jump into this. And the first thing that I want to say right here at the top before we get any further, whether this does bring back Marvel or not, that is secondary to me. Don't get me wrong, I love Marvel vs. Capcom. This is a series that is very important to me. I spent so much of my childhood playing this with my friends, trying to unlock all the characters on the Dreamcast version. So many of my memories of the arcade are all tied to all the different games that are in this collection. I love this series, and I want a brand new installment so bad. However, if that doesn't happen, if this series never gets a new installment, this is still a win. The fact that the unreleasable collection is actually getting released, that is a win 25 hours a day, 8 days a week. I had to make that clear because I know someone out there might be thinking, well, if a new game doesn't get made, then what was the point of all this? The point is that now we finally have a collection of all these games that we have been begging for years, and it's now accessible to a whole new audience, and everyone can finally play this game. That's what the point of this was. So no matter what happens for the future of Marvel vs. Capcom, the fact that we got this collection at all is good news no matter how you split it. And I know a lot of people are going to hear me say that and they're going to reply, well, if that's all you cared about, then you could always play these games. Just get them on Fightcade. Listen, Fightcade is great. Fightcade is fundamental to the very DNA of the modern-day FGC and is one of the most important tools for preserving older games. All the praise and applause to Fightcade. I am not in any way trying to be negative to Fightcade here. but it is so important that we don't have to rely on Fightcade for this. Again, not bad-mouthing Fightcade. I have to be clear on that because we all know the joke about how if you say you like pancakes on the internet, someone will assume you hate waffles. No, Fightcade is great. But I've talked on this channel a lot over the years about how there is a divide between the more dedicated and competitive fighting game players and the casual players. And the dedicated players who use Fightcade don't seem to understand how much the casual players do not want to use Fightcade, if they even know what that is. When this collection got announced, someone on Twitter told me after a few weeks everyone is just going to go back to using Fightcade, and I replied that 95% of the people who are going to buy this collection don't know what Fightcade is. And I got a handful of people saying that's not true, everyone knows what Fightcade is. You know what else I got? A whole lot of people asking, what the hell is Fightcade? Yeah, listen, to the dedicated fighting game players out there, I love you, you're great, but sometimes you live in a completely different world from the rest of fighting game fans. And Fightcade is probably the best example of that. Because there are tons of people out there who either don't know what Fightcade is, don't know how to use it, or just flat out don't want to use it. When it comes to knowing how to use it, I know a lot of people love to say Fightcade is so easy, and to that I say, no, it's easy for you. A lot of less tech-savvy people have no idea what they're doing with it. Again, I don't want to keep going back to Twitter on this, but there is one exchange that summed up perfectly what I'm talking about. Someone replied to my tweet and said, oh, it's super easy to use Fightcade. You just go in there and get the files from here, download this, load the files in here, then you do this and that, and you're good. And then someone replied to them with, quote, I tried that, and it still took me and my friends 6 months to figure out how to play Darkstalkers. And for that one particular player, something tells me they were really happy when the original Capcom Fighting Collection came out and they didn't have to rely on Fightcade anymore to play Darkstalkers. Yeah, some people are just more tech-savvy than other people, and it's not as easy for everyone to figure this out. Let me put it to you like this. Video games are like pizza. Stay with me on this, I promise I'm going somewhere. Let's say one day your local pizza place shuts down and you can't get your favorite pizza anymore. Sure, there are other pizza places out there, there's the store-bought stuff, but they're not the pizza you like. No, your local place had the exact kind of pizza that you want. Then somebody comes to you and says, I don't see what the problem is, just make the pizza yourself. We have the recipe. Just mix some yeast and sugar into a bowl with some warm water. Then in another bowl, combine some flour and salt. Then combine the flour and the yeast and some olive oil and knead that into a dough. Then put that into a bowl with some plastic wrap over it for an hour. Then preheat the oven to... Okay, I'm going to stop right there. Because the point is, all the chefs out there and all the people who know how to cook heard me saying that and said, yeah, that's super easy, I don't see what the problem is. But everyone else's eyes glazed over the second I brought up a second bowl. That's what emulating games is. Everyone who understands it finds it easy, but the vast majority of us just want to pick up the phone and say, yeah, can I get a large pie? 10 minutes? Great, thanks. And then be done with it. And I haven't even brought up the safety concerns. Don't get me wrong, Fightcade is safe. I haven't heard a single bad story about. I haven't heard anyone have any problems with Fightcade. But no matter how safe it may be, end of the day, you're still telling someone, hey, all you have to do is download this program from a website you've never heard of, then download these files from a guy you don't know, and then put all of that into your very expensive computer that you can't afford to replace and you use for work and school and socializing and has all of your personal information inside. Again, Fightcade is safe. But you understand why a huge chunk of people hear what I just said and decide they're not gonna risk it, right? So yes, Fightcade is great. But it is important that Marvel is getting an official release. And it's especially important that it's getting a physical release. A physical release means that no matter what happens, we have a way to play this game now. Every online server on the planet could crash and we would all be huddled around bonfires telling stories of the old world, and we would still be able to pull out our Switches and play some Marvel. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but you get where I'm going with this. Point is, it is amazing that this is getting a re-release, and if it's anywhere near as good as the last Capcom Fighting Collection, which had amazing extras and excellent online, then this is everything I could possibly have asked for. But now it's time for the real meat of today's episode. Everyone wants another Marvel vs. Capcom, but all the rumors said that the relationship between these two went south after Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Apparently, there have been almost no talks between these two companies since that game flopped. I know someone is going to say, well, they put out the 1UP arcade release of the games, that must mean something. Yes, they did put out that 1UP arcade cabinet. But that's because arcade consoles count as toys, and toys are handled by completely different divisions than the video game department. And I don't know if you know this about Disney, but they are more than willing to make toys out of all their products. So this arcade release didn't really mean anything for the actual game division of both these companies. But this collection? Yeah, this means these two divisions are actually talking again. And since MVCI, both Marvel and Capcom are in very different places in regards to their games. Capcom actually cares about their fighting games again, and that division is currently being headed up by two guys who know what to do with them. And Capcom actually has the money now to support these games. When MVCI was getting made, Capcom was struggling for money, and you can totally feel that in that game. But now, they're swimming in money. Capcom is having some of the best financial years it's ever had. And Disney, and especially Marvel, is also in a very different place in regards to their video games. The days of Marvel's Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy are long gone. Don't get me wrong, Guardians of the Galaxy was great, and I hate having to mention it in the same breath as Marvel's Avengers, but both those games came out deep in the time period when Marvel thought we have to make everything like the movies. And those games suffered heavily for that because sure, people like the Marvel movies, but they don't want them in everything, especially their video games. Video game fans want something very different from their Marvel games than they do from their Marvel movies. And it looks like Marvel finally realizes that. Since Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy and Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, we've gotten Spider-Man games that lean far more heavily into the colorful, poppy, crazy comic book source material. We've gotten games based around these strange, out-there corners of the Marvel universe that haven't been in the movies yet. Games that include mountains of Marvel characters all based on their comic book versions instead of the movies. We've gotten a new multiplayer hero shooter game coming out with a wild roster full of crazy choices from every corner of the Marvel universe, all in new outfits that are each loaded with more color and imagination than every MCU costume combined. Heck, the most popular Marvel game over the past decade has been Marvel Snap, a card game that is full of some of the deepest comic book pulls I have ever seen in a game. My point is, Capcom is finally willing to support their fighting games, and Marvel is finally realizing what people want in their video games. The only thing that was missing was the two of them being willing to sit down and talk. And the fact that this collection is getting released means they're sitting down and talking. So, the lines of communication are open. Now all that's left is for this game to pass the Capcom test. Okay, this is the main reason I want to make this video because I kind of have a history with the Capcom test. Everyone knows what this is. It's where Capcom puts out a re-release of an old game, and if you want that new game, you have to buy the old game. And if you've watched this channel for long enough, you've heard me say many times, the Capcom test does not work. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Capcom has never sold enough copies of an old game for it to get a brand new installment. That has happened. What I mean when I say the Capcom test does not work is A, there isn't necessarily a direct correlation between how many copies of an old game will sell and how many copies a brand new game would sell, and B, the way that Capcom goes about determining if a re-release is a success tends to be greatly flawed. For starters, a lot of fans who want these new installments probably already own the games you're trying to sell them. Remember when they put out the Darkstalkers Resurrection collection literally less than a year after they sold each of the games in that collection individually on the PlayStation Network? No, I will never let that go. I'm going to continue bringing it up until the day I die. Secondly, from what we've heard from the people within Capcom, it looks like these examples of the Capcom test all needed to sell like brand new games. And that's insane. Re-releases of old games rarely sell as much as a brand new game, and when it comes to re-releases of old fighting games, That is next to impossible. In fact, I can only think of one time in which that actually happened. But I'll talk more about that later. This is largely because for fighting games to sell well, they have to bring in a dedicated fan base and also a casual audience. No fighting game will ever sell high numbers without bringing in a casual audience. And when it comes to fighting games, casual players really don't care that much about older games. There are very few older fighting games that have that massive nostalgic audience. Street Fighter, for example, has that, and Capcom did say that the sales on their Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection were higher than they expected, so that's good. But the vast majority of other fighting games don't have that casual nostalgic audience. Mortal Kombat has it, Tekken has it, but after that, yeah, there's not many. But here's the kicker. Even the dedicated fighting game audiences don't really buy re-releases that much, simply because most dedicated fighting game players really want to focus most of their time and attention on whatever the latest game is because that's where the most players are. So, fighting game re-releases have big hills to climb. And honestly, I think Capcom has come to realize that. As I said, a decade ago, Capcom expected their re-releases to sell as much as brand new titles. But it sounds like now they've finally adjusted their expectations accordingly. As I said, Capcom considered the Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection to be a success, and according to the sales charts, after 2 years, it sold 1.8 million copies. And for a re-release, that is great! But it's definitely a little bit lower than what you would expect from a brand new release. Meaning, Capcom must be judging it on a different scale now. They weren't expecting it to sell like a brand new installment of Street Fighter. And then, when the Capcom Fighting Game Collection was released, the producer of that collection, Shuhei Matsumoto, said, quote, "We do not think that this will necessarily increase the possibility of the series being revived." And a lot of people got mad at that and said, oh, then why should we even buy it? If this won't lead to a brand new Darkstalkers, then what's the point of buying it? But I felt the exact opposite about that quote. I was happy to hear that. Because that collection was never going to lead to a new Darkstalkers because it was never going to sell 2 million copies. Meaning Capcom was just going to shove all those other fighting games back into the vault once again. So I didn't hear that quote and think, oh man, so they don't want to make any new games. I heard that quote and thought, oh thank God, Capcom finally realizes these re-releases don't translate to how much people want a brand new game. So they're not going to tie the possible resurrection of these series to the sales of a re-release that would never hit those numbers. It feels like Capcom now looks at the sales of their re-releases as measurements of not how much people want a brand new game, but of how much people want re-releases. I mean, for starters, we talked about that Street Fighter collection that sold very well for a re-release, and what did that lead to? Another fighting game re-release. Then that collection, again, didn't do insane, but it sold well for a re-release. And now we're getting this Marvel collection, and the fighting game collection is listed as a whole series on their website, implying they have more planned down the road. Or, let's look beyond fighting games. The Mega Man Zero collection sold well. Did we get a brand new Mega Man Zero or X game? No, we got the Mega Man Battle Network collection. The Phoenix Wright collection sold great, it did incredibly well. Did we get a brand new game? Nope, we got another Ace Attorney collection. Did that one sell well? Yes. Did we get a brand new game? No, we got another Ace Attorney collection. When it comes to what gets brand new games from Capcom, it seems like the sales of these re-releases don't actually matter that much. It feels like the two things that are actually important are A, is someone at the company passionate about making it, and B, are the guys at the top okay with it? Listen, I'm sure after those Mega Man and Ace Attorney sales, the guys at the top are all on board with making a brand new game. But maybe nobody at the company has any plans for them. Maybe nobody actually developing the games wants to jump on that project. Or heck, let's flip that around. Dragon's Dogma 2 just came out, and I was stunned by that announcement. I mean, nothing against Dragon's Dogma, but the first game sold and reviewed okay. It didn't flop or anything, it did fine, but that's about it. It did okay. When researching for this video, I found that in its first 3 years, the original game and the re-release of that original game sold roughly 2 million copies combined. which is good. But it's not guaranteed sequel numbers, especially from Capcom. But Hideaki Itsuno apparently just really wanted to make another Dragon's Dogma, and the heads at Capcom were okay with that. Hideaki Itsuno also really wants to make another Rival Schools, but the heads at Capcom are not okay with that, so you see how it needs both of those things to line up. Yeah, I think when it comes to deciding what gets made at Capcom now, it's really more about the developers themselves and the guys at the top approving it. So, Capcom has pretty much said that their Capcom test now no longer judges whether or not a new game gets made. And looking at what titles do get released and which ones don't, it looks like that's the case. So, with that being said, time to finally answer the big question today. Could this re-release actually lead to a brand new Marvel vs. Capcom? Yes, 100%, it absolutely could. That's right, plot twist, baby, didn't see that coming, did you? Yes, this collection could absolutely lead to a brand new Marvel vs. Capcom game. And I promise I'm not just saying that because I'm chock full of hopium and denial right now. I'm always full of denial, this collection doesn't change anything. No, there are actually many reasons to believe that this collection could lead to a new Marvel vs. Capcom. For starters, as I said, if you want to get a game made, you need a developer who is actually passionate about making it. And right now, Capcom's fighting games are being head up by Takayuki Nakayama and Shuhei Matsumoto. And these two love fighting games. Any chance they get, they talk about how much they love the genre, especially older titles from Capcom, and they would love to bring them back. But hold up now. The previous head of Capcom's fighting games, Yoshinori Ono, also loved Capcom's older fighting games, and he also tried his hardest to resurrect some older series. But it never happened. So, why would this be any different? Well, that's because of the other half of the equation. You need developers who are passionate about making the game, and you also need the guys at the top to be willing to approve it. And when Ono was at Capcom, he was always butting heads with the higher-ups. They were constantly shooting down his ideas. But today, Capcom's higher-ups... Well, okay, I'll admit, it's still kinda hard to read them. It's difficult to know what they're going to approve. But the one thing that we know for sure is they love live services. If you can get your customer to pay for updates and DLC, they are all for it. And I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but fighting games have been really successful as live services. But yeah, I don't know. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite hurt this game's reputation so much. I mean, if this game was going to come back, Nakayama and Matsumoto would have to prove that they can take a game that might be from a beloved series, but had been tarnished by its last unpopular installment, and they then took that game and made it a huge success. Could these two prove that they're capable of something like that?
Street Fighter 6.
Alright, they literally did that exact thing. Street Fighter V fumbled hard when it was released and spent years stumbling around to try and repair itself. And sure, eventually it turned itself around. Mostly. But there was no denying the game's reputation was hurt after that installment. And then Street Fighter 6 came out, and it's been dominating the FGC and bringing in new players for the past year. If these two went to their boss's office and told them we want to bring back Marvel, all they would have to do is say, look at what we did for Street Fighter. We did it once, we can do it again. But hold up, you might be saying. If that's all it takes, then why do the sales of this collection matter? You said that you don't believe Capcom uses the Capcom test anymore to judge whether or not a new game gets made. Yes, I did say that, and I do believe that. I don't think how many copies a collection or re-release sells really sways Capcom one way or another when it comes to making a new game. But Capcom ain't the only one who is going to be looking at those numbers. Remember, this isn't Capcom vs. Capcom. No, this is Marvel vs. Capcom. And while I don't believe these numbers could change Capcom's mind, they could totally change Marvel's mind. Disney over the past several years has been putting out tons of video games based on their properties, ranging from big AAA titles to smaller, quirkier games. Different budgets, different genres. They've even put out tons of re-releases of games that I was not expecting to ever see the light of day again. My point is, when it comes to Disney's modern day games, they seem to be okay with various sales levels. They don't really strike me as saying these games must sell amazing high numbers or else we're not doing it. And in order for this collection to get made, Capcom had to go to Disney and tell them, this is how many copies we think this collection will sell. And sure, there is totally a chance that Capcom highballed them on those numbers. However, remember, this is part of the Capcom Fighting Collection. It's part of that series. You know Disney's first question was, okay, how many copies has this series sold? Yeah, Capcom would have to go to Disney and say, here's what our previous fighting game collection sold, we can expect something around those numbers. So, if you heard me saying earlier, hey, I guess the fighting game collection was a success, and you thought, nah, I don't believe that, I don't think it's sold. Well, hey, if you're right, then that's a good thing, because it means Capcom set Marvel's expectations really low. So if this collection comes out, and it blows their estimates out of the water, that is going to look huge to Marvel. That's the kind of thing that will get them thinking. And that's not the only sales number Marvel is going to be looking at. I mentioned that Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite sold well below expectations. But what's worse is that came on the heels of Street Fighter V, which also didn't meet expectations. Yeah, faith in Capcom's fighting games were low at that time. But we're not living in the Street Fighter V time anymore. No, we're in the Street Fighter VI world now. Capcom now has a game that they can bring into Marvel's office, slap down on the table and say, yeah, we're back. My point is, letting Capcom make a fighting game for you no longer feels like a big risk. Instead, it actually feels like a good idea. But could this game actually sell those numbers, you may be asking? I mentioned earlier, it's really hard for fighting game re-releases to sell big numbers because both the dedicated and the casual fighting game fans tend to focus mostly on the new titles. However, when it comes to Marvel, that's one of the few older titles that still has a really strong dedicated audience. It still has those serious fighting game players who keep playing it to this day. So there is a good chance that they'll show up for this collection. But then there's the problem of the casual audience. As I said, no fighting game can sell strong numbers just appealing to the serious player base. Every fighting game that succeeds does so by bringing in a large casual audience. And as I said, there are very few titles that can get a casual audience to check out their older games. Luckily, Marvel happens to be one of those titles. This game has a massive casual audience. Remember the free MVC2 campaign? I got news for you. As much as I love them, free Darkstalkers and free Rival Schools would not have gotten trending. But free MVC2? That was on fire across the whole world because the audience for Marvel vs. Capcom goes far beyond just the dedicated fighting game players. It's got a huge casual audience. In fact, it's got two casual audiences. You see, when it comes to fighting games, there's two kinds of casual audiences. There's the casual fighting game fans who pick up the games and they enjoy them, but they mostly enjoy them for, say, single-player content or for playing against their friends. They're not going to go to tournaments, they probably don't spend a ton of time in ranked mode. They play the game and they have fun with them, but they're not going to make it their job. But then there's the casual fans who aren't fighting game fans at all. They're not invested in the genre, they don't really pay any attention to it, but they'll still pick up a game that interests them. They pay no attention to the FGC, they don't follow any of the news stories that are coming out, but hey, there's a new Street Fighter out? Yeah, I know Street Fighter, yeah, you know what, I think I'll check that out. And Marvel vs. Capcom 2 appeals to both those audiences. Many casual fighting game fans might not have played this game before it up and vanished, but they've spent the last decade hearing every FGC streamer and YouTuber talk about, hyping up this legendary game. You better believe their interests are peaked right now. A lot of those casual fighting game fans want to finally play these games. And as for that casual non-fighting game audience, first up, Marvel vs. Capcom, that title alone is going to get people interested who don't know this game. Those are two massive franchises, and even if you don't know anything about these games, just hearing that will at least get you curious. But beyond that, this is one of those titles that comes with a mountain of nostalgia. If you played video games in the early 2000s, you probably have some memories of this game. As I mentioned, the Street Fighter collection sold above Capcom's expectations because Street Fighter is one of those titles that can bring in players no matter how interested they are in fighting games. Just people who like video games in general know what Street Fighter is, so they're willing to check out this collection. And for people of a certain age range, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 has that same appeal. After this collection was announced in that Nintendo Direct, I saw so many fighting game players asking, "Why wasn't this announced at EVO? We all would have lost our mind if it was announced at EVO." Yes, you would have. But you know who wouldn't have? The non-fighting game players who still want to buy this collection. That audience probably doesn't even know what EVO is. And this announcement would have gone completely under their radar. Trust me, to get the casual audience in that this game needs to sell big numbers, the Nintendo Direct was absolutely the right place to announce it. And you may be doubting all this, you might think that there's no way this game could sell those kinds of numbers, that this game could bring in that more casual audience, but I believe it can. Because it already did. I mentioned earlier there's only one re-release of a fighting game I can think of that sold big new game release style numbers. You know what that game was? The original digital re-release of Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Yeah, that became one of the highest selling digital games at the time of its release, and I've even heard people saying that those numbers are the reason why Marvel vs. Capcom 3 got made at all. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure that's true, because if you look at the numbers of when that game was released and when Marvel 3 came out, that would imply that Marvel 3 only had about a year to a year and a half long development cycle, which I guess could have happened. We haven't done our Marvel vs. Capcom retrospective yet, so I'm not entirely sure how long the development cycle on that was, but yeah, if this is true, then they must have been crunched during that development. But whether or not that re-release directly led into Marvel 3, what's important is it's proof this collection can sell the numbers it needs. And you know something? This is totally a crazy conspiracy theory. I'll fully admit that. But I don't think Capcom and Marvel are the only parties here who believe this collection can sell. Everyone is wondering why this game is coming to PlayStation and Switch and Steam, but not Xbox. Yeah, that's a little bit strange, isn't it? Especially considering that Capcom is putting so many of their brand new games out on Game Pass. It kind of feels like Capcom and Xbox are all buddy-buddy right now, so why is this game skipping it? Well, this isn't the first time a Capcom fighter didn't come to Xbox. Street Fighter V didn't come to Xbox, and that's because Sony helped fund that game, and part of the deal was you can't have it released on our biggest competitor's console. Why am I bringing this up? Because Sony owns EVO and constantly streams fighting game tournaments on its official YouTube channel. Sony has gone all in on promoting fighting games, and you can't own EVO and you can't stream that many fighting game tournaments and not know the power of Marvel vs. Capcom. I wouldn't be shocked if we eventually learn that Sony helped to fund this collection because they also think Marvel could possibly come back and they want to be on the ground floor of it. But speaking of the actual fighting game audience for this, that kind of brings me back to something that I brought up earlier. I said that we don't know how much the fighting game collection sold, but a lot of people looked at those Steam numbers and said, oh no, it didn't sell well. Just look at how high the max player count was. Well, for starters, as I said, I think Capcom just finally lowered their expectations for their collections and their re-releases, which, to be clear, is a good thing. Lowered expectations for video game developers leads to more video games. But also, those lower player numbers don't really say anything about how many people actually bought the game. You see, fighting games tend to get really high player numbers, especially at launch, because everyone wants to hop on as soon as possible to start learning everything and practicing and going online and competing. It's a genre that rewards a lot of people being online at the exact same time and as soon as possible. But when it comes to the fighting game collection, that was definitely something not aimed at reigniting a dormant competitive scene for those games. It was more of a, hey, this is a cool thing to own if you're a fighting game fan. This wasn't one of those games where everyone had to be online at the exact same time. No, it was more of an, oh cool, I'd like to own that, and I'll pop it in whenever I feel like it. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because when this game was announced, there was overwhelming cheers and applause from all corners of the FGC. But because it's the internet, there's always going to be those people out there who try to bend themselves into a pretzel to find a problem with the situation, because I guess it's just easier for them to be miserable all the time than to let happiness make them vulnerable for 5 seconds. You could grow a crop that cures world hunger and someone is still going to shout out, "Yeah, but I bet it tastes bad." And I did see a handful of people out there arguing, "Yeah, but I bet after a few months there won't be anyone playing it online." Okay, let's address that real quick. Capcom wants you to play their fighting games a lot. They want those player numbers to be high at all times. That is true for all fighting games. ArcSys, Bandai, NetherRealm, they all want to check those Steam numbers and see people still showing up by the thousands. And do you know why those companies want a lot of people continuing to play their fighting games? Because if people are still playing your fighting games after a couple of months, that means you can sell them DLC. If there's still a lot of people online playing your fighting game, that means that they are dedicated to that game and they're willing to spend even more money on it. I got news for you. There's no DLC for Marvel vs. Capcom 2 coming. Capcom doesn't have sprites of Nero and Black Panther just waiting in the wings ready to drop 2 months down the road. When this game comes out, that's it. That's the game. At most, you might get a tiny quality of life improvement in the menus a month after launch, but that's it. The end. So, with that being said, do you know what Capcom is going to think if everyone stops playing this game after 2 months? Not a damn thing, because they already got your money. Capcom is totally cool with you buying this game, playing it for an hour, and saying, "Hey, that was fun, but I'm going back to Street Fighter 6 now." Because that was all they needed you to do. If tons of people buy this game, they could spend 0 hours actually playing it, and Capcom will still be popping champagne bottles because they still made all the money they could possibly have made off those customers. And when it comes to determining the success of this release, that is the only thing that matters. How many people actually bought the game? So, to sum up, this game now has developers who want to bring it back. They've got the history to convince the higher-ups to let them. Marvel and Capcom are both in places where they're talking again and are more likely to be open to the idea of a brand new game. Capcom's expectations for their re-releases isn't nearly as high as it used to be, and the only thing that matters to the success of this game is the sales numbers. Not how big the sustainable player base is, just how many people buy it. In other words, yes, I have no idea if Marvel vs. Capcom could ever come back. It could be gone forever. However, if it could ever come back, if it is at all possible for us to get another Marvel vs. Capcom, this is the best chance we're ever going to get. This absolutely will send a message to both Marvel and Capcom that audiences want this series to come back. However, to swing this all back around to what I said in the beginning, even if we never get a brand new game, the fact that we finally get these old games back, the fact that we finally get to play them again, and they're being packaged into a collection that looks like it's going to have the same love and attention that the last fighting game collection got, that is all the good news I need. No matter what else happens, this is still a win. But that's just my thoughts, and woo, what a lot of thoughts they were. Again, I thought this was going to be like a 15-minute long video, but I guess I just had more things to say than I expected. But if you're still here, thank you for sticking around. Let me know what you think of all this news. Do you have any hopes for this game returning? Also, do you want us to do more videos like this, talking about just news stories? As I said, I don't normally do videos like this. I don't normally do videos talking about brand new stories or developments. We tend to talk more about older games and retrospectives of the history of games. But if you want to see me do more videos like this, maybe not as long, let me know that in the comments down below. But you can also check the description down below to find my socials, to find me all around the web for even more stuff, or you can join our Patreon to get early looks at upcoming videos. Thanks again for tuning in, everyone. Stay safe out there. Come back next time.